Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, Josh Cincinnati and I chat with Matt Green, a cryptographer and professor at Johns Hopkins University. In this far-reaching conversation, we cover his early ZK blockchain research, the founding of Zcash, the growth in the ZK space, and how the space is ready for tangible, real-world use cases. We also talk about navigating the desire for anonymity and the existing regulatory bodies. We talk about his new project, Sealance, and then dive into his take on the Tornado Cash sanctions and what this means for development in the ZK space. Now, before we start in, I want to announce and invite you to join us for the upcoming ZK Hack 3, a virtual multi-week event starting on November 22nd. It's all online, so you can join from wherever you are. Now, ZK Hack is a very special event. It's a combination of a multi-week series of workshops from the best teams in ZK, as well as a puzzle hacking competition happening at the same time. So on the workshop front, we have teams like Aztec, RiskZero, Aleo, Anoma, Scroll, Mina, and more presenting. These workshops are designed to onboard and show developers how they can start working with ZK DSLs, platforms, tools, and the tech. Each workshop is different, so have a look at our schedule and sign up for the events that are most interesting for you. Now, while the workshops are designed for all levels of learning, including beginner and intermediate, we also at the same time have something for the experts, or the folks who really want to challenge themselves, and that is the ZK puzzles. Every week, we release one of these puzzles. That is a broken ZK system or protocol. If you find the bug, submit an answer as quickly as you can, you might rank on our leaderboard. We will have 3 of these for this edition, and the top ranking hackers will get prizes, spotlights, and lots of cred within our community. And even if you're not an expert, you might want to give it a shot. So keep your eye on Twitter and our Discord, and I'm going to add links to our first kickoff event in the show notes. So I hope to see you there. Now, Tanya will share a little bit about this week's sponsor.
Today's episode is sponsored by Aave. Aave Grants is a community-led grants program focused on growing a thriving ecosystem of contributors within Aave by funding ideas, projects, and events that benefit the protocol and the surrounding ecosystem. Aave's latest deployment, V3, was launched on 6 networks and introduces new features like isolation mode, efficiency mode, and portals. A decentralized collateral-backed stablecoin native to Aave called GHO has also been announced. Look out for more details on the testnet and release coming soon. You can explore the protocol at aave.com, and if you're building in the ecosystem, apply for a grant through aavegrants.org. That's aavegrants.org. So thanks again, Aave. And now, here's our episode.
Today, Josh Cincinnati and I are here with Matt Green, a cryptographer and professor at Johns Hopkins University. He works in the fields of wireless, payment, and content protection with a strong focus on privacy. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
So my hope with this episode is that we get to know a little bit more about your work and check in with you about the state of ZK. It's changed a lot over the last few years, and the rate of change is accelerating. There's always been concerns about the regulatory response to this technology. And this summer, we actually saw, it happening with the Tornado Cash sanctions by OFAC. So yeah, it's a great time to speak to you, and I'm really excited to dive into it. But before we do that, Josh, you're going to be co-hosting with me.
I know.
You've been on the show a number of times, but I feel like we do need to hear a little bit of an update from you.
Yeah, because it's been a minute since I've been last on.
Wait, was the last time you were on actually New Year's?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been a while. 2022 is almost over, which doesn't make any sense to me either, but
well, I'm very glad that you're back on. And yeah, do tell us, what have you been up to? What's new?
Yeah, the biggest news for me is that I am back full-time in the cryptocurrency industry. I've started another organization called Radiant Commons, which is focused actually on a project whose founder you had on an episode a little while back. Project is Penumbra, and the founder is Henry DeValence. He and I actually met through our work in Zcash. And so I'm really excited about it. It's another opportunity to contribute to the privacy space in cryptocurrency, which, as Matt knows, is definitely something that is near and dear to my heart as well as his. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. That's a big passion and what draws me to this space. But my side hobby of shit posting got a bit of a boost because I
Ooh.
finally have a personal newsletter. This is just through RSS and my own website that I'm hosting, but I do a little bit of narrating some fun articles that I write. Actually, the last thing I did was a little different. I interviewed my dad and tried to explain cryptocurrency and penumbra to him, and I
Nice.
failed. But it was a fun time. So.
Is Josh's dumb voice ever coming back?
That's sort of I think that's the spiritual successor to Josh's
Okay.
dumb voice.
Cool.
Yeah. It's like Josh's dumb voice, the extended cut.
Fantastic. Josh, thanks so much for that. And congrats.
Thanks. Yeah. It's great. It's great to be back.
And everyone should be looking out for Radiant Commons.
Radiant
That's the name,
Commons.
eh?
Yeah. And then my little newsletter thing is called Bit Banter.
Nice. Cool. So, Matt, I am so excited that you're actually on the show. I don't know if you know this. I've tried to get you on the show through like a number of different channels, and this is the first time that it worked. So I'm really excited to hear about all of your work.
And I'm excited too because, Matt and I used to talk much more frequently when I was at the, Zcash Foundation. And it's really been a minute since I've had an opportunity to hear what he's been up to. So it's really cool too.
Yeah, every few months I've been like, hey, maybe Josh is going to come back in and do something, and here's this thing you could do. And I talked to him, and he's like, not quite yet, not quite yet. So I'm glad that you're back in the world.
Oh,
Nice.
Thanks.
So, Matt, I want to kind of start, since it's the first time we're meeting, I want to hear a little bit about what got you first excited about cryptography.
Yeah, I have a weird background. I actually started out way back in college. I actually got a music degree in electronic music, and I wanted to do anything but be a computer scientist. And like electronic music is still computer science. So like it's not that far away. But I desperately wanted to be a composer, and it turned out that I wasn't talented. So what I learned is that I kind of computers drew me. No, it's okay. Computers drew me back in. And I actually ended up for a few years working on this kind of perfect job at AT&T Labs, where I was working on basically selling music over the internet. And the part of selling the music over the internet that got me really excited was this whole part where the music had to be encrypted, and we had to make it so that you could keep people from buying the same song twice. Which when you look back at that.
DRM.
Remember, I know.
Little fun fact, Matt. I actually did a minor in music technology. That was like the only technology actually I ever studied. I mean, I think it might be around the same era. Are you talking like early 2000s?
Early 2000s. Yep.
Yeah,
Nice.
DRM technology. I remember this.
It was the cool. I mean, like, okay, the DRM itself is awful, and I've dealt with it for years, and it's like a dead area. It's stupid, but it was. The technology itself, I just kind of fell in love with it. And it wasn't so much the DRM tech, it was the fact that you could do all these amazing things with cryptography that would allow you to do all kinds of stuff. Like, for example, transact online in ways that didn't require you to trust people or didn't require you to tell people what you were doing and who you were doing it with. And I thought that was amazing. And it just kind of like addicted me. And from that moment on, I knew that was what I wanted to do for kind of the rest of my life. And I kind of eventually had the chance to go back to grad school and study that. And the rest is a very, very long story, but that's pretty much the end of the simple part.
So you're a professor at Johns Hopkins. Are you a professor of cryptography now?
I am. I'm a professor of computer science. I work in the Information Security Institute, and I work on applied cryptography. And, I like to say I work on applied cryptography and computer security because I think that, cryptography is a field of making computers do things securely. It's not just theory. And so I really, really, I don't like to give up that part of it, but, that is what I do. Yes.
From that time of studying, have you always stayed in academia, or have you kind of like ventured in and out?
No, it's pretty weird. So in grad school, I mean, it's a long story, but in grad school, I actually dropped out for a little while. I took a leave of absence and I founded a company, and we went to work. Basically, we did security evaluation for a whole bunch of like Fortune 100 companies, and we went and hired a bunch of hackers. I worked with this guy Charlie Miller, who's a pretty famous iPhone hacker, and we did the first vulnerability in the iPhone, and we worked for all these different DRM companies and some other really interesting kind of stuff that I can't talk about. And I really loved that. Like, I loved learning about product. I loved learning about how real systems worked in the world, and I liked that part almost as much as I like doing research. But the thing that excited me was kind of tying that research work where we could do new things to this real world of like actual stuff that human beings can use. And so that ended up kind of driving the research that I did. Instead of writing like theory papers, which, honestly, I wouldn't have been the best at anyway, I found that I had this niche where, figuring out how to make real things do new stuff was what got me excited. And so then I went back to eventually took a teaching job a few years later and wound up where I am now, but there with a few different interludes along the way.
How did that evolve into finding Bitcoin and then the work on Zero Coin and Zero Cash that led to us working together, actually?
Yeah, so I think it was about 2011, and a colleague of mine, Steve Weiss, wrote me and said, "Hey, there's this new thing called Bitcoin. Have you heard of this?" And I did some research on it. I said, "There's no way this could possibly work." And after like spending 2 weeks kind of looking at the design and the white paper and the code, I kind of grudgingly accepted that yes, it seemed to work, and I couldn't find a problem with it. But the problem I found with it, I mean, not just me, but the problem I saw was it had no privacy, right? This idea that you're going to write every single transaction you make onto a public ledger that's shared by everybody else. And sure, you're not using your name, you're using a wallet address or a pseudonym, but that's nonsense. And everybody who's studied this area of transaction anonymity knows that that does not work. And, now there are multi-billion-dollar companies today proving to us that it doesn't work. But back then, you had to kind of make that argument. And so anyway, along with my grad students, Christina Garman and Ian Myers, we spent a bunch of time thinking about how do we fix this problem. And I remember, it was actually Ian who had the kind of big insight, and we went and we wrote this paper called Zero Coin, which in retrospect is kind of a stupid name, but basically it was the first, it was the first academic, private currency. And then later we met up with some other really smart people who were, working at MIT at that time. And we basically put together this project to do this thing called Zero Cash, which became Zcash. And ultimately, I think is kind of the basis of a lot of these modern privacy systems like Aztec and Tornado Cash. And, I think even Penumbra, a lot of different things that is really exciting to get to just build that and deploy it.
Was this the first time that you had zero knowledge proofs and blockchain in a single kind of paper?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is way back. This is like 2013, which, I guess doesn't seem like that long ago, but like in blockchain land was really, really long ago. I mean, Ethereum wasn't even a thing back then. So it was really, people did not believe it could work. And the zero knowledge proof technology, these things called ZK snarks, were just kind of coming along. And, the paper that we kind of based some of the zero knowledge technology on was called Nearly Practical Zero Knowledge Argument. So like, just to give you a sense, like even the cryptographers didn't believe it. And it was practical. And I think that was this huge watershed where like, wait a second, for the first time, this crazy advanced cryptography, this moon math is actually being used by like real people out in the world. And that, it doesn't happen every day in crypto. So it was really fun to do that.
That's so cool. So like, had you been super aware of the zero knowledge proof work, or was it actually for this project that it was kind of like brought to your attention?
Oh, no. I mean, I have been aware of this. I worked on privacy preserving protocols all the way through since grad school. I worked on really boring stuff. Like, how do you download files without people knowing what files you download? So you have to develop zero knowledge proofs for that. I've like been in love with eCash, although I didn't really have any like great new ideas on eCash because it seemed like before Bitcoin, eCash was kind of a dead area because it was very centralized and you had to get a bank to do it. So, zero knowledge proofs were a huge, huge thing for me. There was this new technology that was much smaller and faster called ZK snarks. And, the idea that we could just plop these things together and like, for me, and I'm just to be a boring, scientist thing, the area that I work in was not necessarily making better zero knowledge proofs. Like for me, the area that I work on is building protocols that use zero knowledge. And like the analogy here is imagine you're a car manufacturer, right? And there's a company that builds awesome fuel injection systems or great, power windows, right? I don't want to like dismiss zero knowledge as just being that. But for me, the exciting part is building the car. Sure. And like the underlying technologies and figuring out how to put them all together, to me, that's very exciting. And there are other people who are brilliant at, kicking forward the exact design of new zero knowledge proof systems. That's not the area that I usually specialize in.
That's interesting you say that because like, I mean, having now been interviewing people on this topic for many, many years, for me, like I'm so excited that we're getting into that space of use cases because that's where I can be I can start to brainstorm. I can be a bit more creative. Before that, it's been just understanding what like researchers who are super, super deep in it are doing. Do you also feel like it's just taken a while before we can even have those ideas and have those brainstorm, or do you think the ideas have already been created, just theoretically?
No, I think we're just on the verge of like a huge kind of revolution in the number of ideas. I mean, the analogy that I
Cool.
would give is like right now, the most boring thing in computer science is like microprocessors, right? Like you don't think about the chip that's inside your computer. You don't think about the ARM chip or the Intel chip or whatever it is, because like there's a whole industry that just sits around all day and makes better and faster chips. Every year, every
Mm.
18 months, your chip's going to get faster and you're going to buy a new MacBook if you can afford it, or every few years or whatever. You don't think about that. But now what people are excited about is like writing software that does stuff and building social networks and doing all that stuff on top of those chips. And that's
Hmm.
good. Like it's healthy. The minute like zero knowledge becomes boring, that's when we can start to do stuff that's exciting.
Nice. So I want to go back to where we were in your story. Zero coin, zero cash. What did you do with that? What happened after that point?
So we wrote an academic paper. It was with a group of cryptographers, great folks. Eli Ben Sasson is the founder of Starkware, so he's gone on to do a bunch of stuff. Around Tromer, other folks. I'm going to start naming everyone here. We wrote this paper, and it was an academic paper, but we made a decision that we wanted to see it deployed. We wanted to see people actually use this technology and not just have it be like an academic project that gets dropped.
Hmm.
So a lot of different things happened. I spent like a few minutes trying to convince people that we should put it into Dogecoin. And like it was actually like my dream that we would like convince the
What?
Dogecoin.
Oh
Now
my
we had this
goodness.
idea like that. I thought it'd be
That's
awesome. I
amazing.
You
thought
could
it
have
would
made
make
the
Doge.
real Dogecoin dark, not that Verge nonsense.
Yes, no, there was like this very clear moment when like I would have done this, but nobody bought that idea. So ultimately, we wanted to do it, but we're academics, we're professors, we're busy, and we didn't really have anyone who could do the hard work of like let's build a company, let's convince people this is not a crazy idea. And I had previously known this guy named Zuko Wilcox O'Hearn, and we'd been friends, or like at least we'd known each other a little bit. And we started talking, and he was interested. He's very excited about Bitcoin, but he thought Bitcoin had some problems. And I tried to convince him, like, this is the direction you want to go, make it private. And he came
Hmm.
back to me and he said, I thought about it. There's no way I'm doing that. Like,
Oh.
private Bitcoin, no, that's a terrible idea. And so I thought that was over. And then he came back a couple of days later. He said, I've been thinking about this. And, the issue for me is not privacy, it's fungibility. Like, I don't like this idea that I'm going to have some Bitcoin that I'm allowed to spend because it's good Bitcoin, and have other
Ooh.
Bitcoin that's like bad Bitcoin, and we know this already is a thing that exists in the
Sure.
world, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
not fungible. You can trace all these currencies, and so once a criminal has touched it, or if it's mined cleanly, it all is different. He said, I want to have a currency where that's not possible, and I think that
Hmm.
this zero cash thing is the way to do it. And so, many years of effort. There was a company founded. There's ultimately a foundation that Josh ran for a while, and the currency was launched. I don't remember the year, but it was an actual thing and went out to the world. It was a crazy time.
2016,
I think
2017?
2016, if
I
I'm
think
remember.
2016 too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of
Yeah.
time before that.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the first, well, actually, I don't know if it was the actual first zero knowledge protocol. It was definitely the first to make waves that people know about.
It's sort of a tie because there's the thing that ultimately became Monero, which is called Bytecoin, was out there
Mm.
also, and it like kind of uses zero knowledge, different kind of zero knowledge. So like but it was the first one that used like the really advanced ZK tech, and I think it was kind of broke ground because of that.
And it's been a catalyst for all these other protocols and ideas that now use the sort of ZK snarks, successors of snarks in the case of Starks, or other proving systems. But I find it, for something that I'm very, very much interested in is sort of seeing that evolution into, I think Zcash proved that you could do it with a sort of simple peer-to-peer payment protocol that mirrored Bitcoin. But now you see folks like Aztec, Aleo, and Penumbra, and all these other protocols coming out where it's actually tied to different kinds of economic activity. And what I'm curious about, Matt, is from your perspective, like what seems to be the most fruitful path for these new protocols working with these new proving systems?
So, there's kind of the starting point for all these blockchains was payments, right? Bitcoin is about payments. How do we do payments? But once you have payments, the next thing you start asking about is how do I make this programmable? And then you get Ethereum and you get smart contracts. And initially the idea of smart contracts is still kind of payments, right? It's payments, but maybe payments with new tokens and new rules and, new escrow types and DeFi. And then eventually you start to think, hey, there's all kinds of other stuff I can do with these chains that, is even more powerful. Maybe I can, make sure that people are correctly auditing their data, or I can do federated machine learning where I have people putting lots of data in. And we're not quite there even before we get to zero knowledge, because that tech isn't quite ready, but it's getting there. And like this idea that we can have these trustworthy peer-to-peer networks of people, who can do computation for us, take it out of our hands, so that if I'm a company or a person, I don't have to like do it all on my own premises or have Amazon do it. Like there are these outsourced people who can do it. That's what smart contracts are about. So I see that as kind of being the next generation of this, is how do I do really interesting outsourced computation with people that I don't have to necessarily trust. And when you have multiple people who are sharing data together and want to pool their data. And I think that's where we're going to see the big applications. And I think it's going to be machine learning again, which is kind of a big deal. It's going to be
ZKML.
Yeah, ZKML is coming. And as weird as it sounds, right? Like it's, putting these technologies together, but it's coming, it's going to happen. And there's going to be a lot of, I think, usage of this, but still the financial applications are very important, right? Payments and not just privacy, right? But like, and I should just full disclosure, I'm involved in a company that's trying to do regulatory compliance using ZK. So what we're doing is it's still just payments, but on top of that, you fold in this idea that like I can prove that I'm obeying some regulatory policy, but I don't have to just go out and like give, the government all of my data. I can just prove this without them sort of seeing all my transactions. So I think that there are other cool things we can do as well.
Totally. I actually want to just bring up a recent tweet. I think it was like 2 days ago that you sent out, like something about ZK research being fantastic, but what you're looking for are more like doing exciting things with ZK. This kind of goes back to what we were saying before, where like maybe focusing less on just like the cool new update to a snark, like under the hood, but rather like now that you have these things, they're getting more efficient, they're actually becoming usable. What could you do with them? Did you get anything back from that? Did you get people actually giving you any ideas you didn't know before?
Not really. I got a lot of people saying, well, what are your ideas? What are your ideas? And I was like, well, we have to ask you.
Yeah,
maybe some when tokens,
I mean, the main use cases that I feel like are super, and we talk about it all the time on the show, but it's like ZK for privacy, ZK for scaling. You're talking ZK for compliance. The very new one is ZKML, which is ZK, it's computation in a zero knowledge environment. I had someone on the show recently who talked about FHE, who said that maybe we'd be better in an FHE environment. Maybe there's a battle to be had there about that. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that, tech people and cryptographers get too specific about these technologies, like, oh, there's ZK, and then there's multi-party computation, and then there's FHE, and like these are three different things. Like, forget all that. Like, one of the things I actually like about the blockchain world, and particularly the kind of like VC side of the blockchain world, is when they say zero knowledge, they don't really care whether they're talking about FHE or ZK. Like, they're not hung up on these technical distinctions. What they mean is, look, there's data, and we want to compute on that data in a way that's scalable and private. And that's it. Like, I don't care if you have to use FHE to do part of it. Like, that's just a tool. Like, for them, and I mean them in a very broad sense, I mean, ZK means this idea of computation without revealing your data and without having to give out all the computation. And so that's huge. So great. I do think that we need other technology. Like, FHE is a very powerful tech, and like we should be integrating that with ZK blockchains, and a multi-party computation lets a whole bunch of people compute on data without any individual knowing, the other people's inputs. So we need that too. These things all have to be plugged together. So that's kind of the tech stack that is not yet in existence that has to be built. Once that tech stack comes into existence, and it's going to happen over the next 5 years, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that we can't even think about, right? Like, there are a lot of processes in your life where like you get audited by the IRS and you have no idea how they picked you. And we learned recently that like sometimes the way they pick you may be a little suspicious. So, now we can prove that auditing was done correctly. We can prove that all kinds of randomized processes were done honestly, and processes, like lottery winner choice and so on. We can do all those things in honest ways, and it doesn't have to be just weird financial stuff. It can be all kinds of different things that we do in our lives that can be done now honestly and verifiably.
Yeah.
Each of these things, when I list them, it's like, oh, that's a little thing, but they add up.
For
And when you
sure.
start piling these technologies on top of each other, it ends up being just a whole different way of kind of thinking about the way we interact with, computers and technology.
I want to throw one more use case out there, which is like ZKID, but it also ZKID. So it's like somehow having a private identity
Yeah.
online using zero knowledge
Reputation.
proofs, reputation, but also keeping a lot of it private. But one of the things that always comes up when you talk about ZKID is the fact that you still are engaging with like real world data.
Mhm.
Like, especially if you wanted it to be like a government issued ZKID, someone still is probably going to like give you the license that's used in the first place, or the driver's license or certificate or whatever it is. That connection point between the real world and the cryptography world, are you paying attention to that? Like, are there any new tools maybe even that you're like starting to learn about in that space?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So, I mean, first of all, this idea of ZKID is not a Web3 thing, right? It's already happening in Web2. Google is deploying this thing called the Privacy Sandbox and this Privacy Pass. So, the idea that Google has is they're being told by government you can't put cookies on people's browsers anymore if you want to advertise them. You have to stop doing that. And so, they're trying to use zero knowledge, like very simple zero knowledge things called anonymous credentials, to make it so that they can, categorize who you are, but without knowing who you are. But if you think about Google, right, like their identity is already assigned to you, right? The reason that Google sells you for free Gmail is not because like they're doing you a favor, and it's not, they do make some money on business customers. They're doing it because all those emails that I've gotten over the last 12 or whatever years are proof that I'm a real person and not some click fraud person. And that to them is the value. So they want to tie that valuable identity that I've built up, that reputation I've built up, they want to tie it to this identifier they can use for advertising, but they've been told at the same time they can't do any of that. So this is, billions and billions and billions of dollars of advertising revenue at stake for them. So they're building out these ZKID systems. So to answer your question, what's the interface there between real world IDs and zero knowledge? Well, the interface isn't always as simple as like my driver's license DMV issuer. I mean, IDs can be these things that you aggregate over time, right? When I started my Gmail account, I was just a person who started a Gmail account. But 10 years later, I'm a person who started a Gmail account and has sent, 10 million messages or whatever it is. And so that makes me a different person.
And has proven that you're a person in a way, not a bot.
Yeah, I have this reputation, and my reputation might be tied to my Netflix account and the other 50 accounts that are all tied to that. And these things are what makes me, I mean, as weird as it is, that's what makes my ID. So a lot of these things are not as simple as just like, do we trust the government to give you an ID? Although, most of the time I do trust the government to give me a driver's license. It's this kind of complicated aggregation of reputation and credentials that all have to be mushed together and reasoned over in interesting ways. And like, that's where the hard technology problems come in, is mushing and reasoning, not just in like take simple ID and turn into ZK credential and go.
It's a bit of a crazy loaded question maybe, but when thinking about that kind of technology development for companies and ecosystems that basically survive on massive surveillance of individuals online, and thinking like, oh, we can figure out some way to anonymize the individual while preserving that business model of like some degree of sort of massive batched surveillance. Do you think that's both possible and compatible with like a free society? Sorry to just dump the massive.
No. I mean, now you're asking like a really hard question. I have a lot of skepticism. I could go off on a long tangent about how I have a lot of skepticism about the way that big corporations are using privacy-preserving technologies, not so much as a way to actually make their customers more private, but as a way to like loosen up and get around legal requirements so they can get at their data. So I'm a little afraid of that we're going to end up with these, credible models that basically allow corporations to predict everything about what you do. And the way we're going to do it is by using quote unquote privacy preserving technologies to get there. So that scares me. That doesn't mean that there is not a path that uses these privacy preserving technologies like ZK to get to a good place. It just means we have to not be stupid. We have to make sure that like when we say we want privacy, we have our eyes on the prize of like, actually the goal should really be privacy. It should not just be like letting companies get around regulation. And that's where human beings fall down a lot of the time. But the technology isn't at fault. It's our use of it that's at fault.
It's so funny because I always thought of like ZK privacy tech kind of positioned on the opposite side of like the big data stuff. Like it was the antithesis to it or the reaction to it, right? And it's interesting to hear that it's actually, yeah, under the hood, those things are already melding, and it could lead to some better privacy in a way, or maybe some protections, but it could also lead to some, yeah, I don't know, getting around regulations that are, barely holding our privacy at bay.
Yeah, and I think we need to understand that better. And I wish that more researchers were thinking, more researchers and people who are not computer science researchers knew about this and were thinking about it. It's like this big thing that's about to happen to us, and we're just watching it happen and not realizing.
I do want to also bring up the term ZK. Like you just said, that VCs see it all in the same bucket. The amount of projects that have a sprinkle of ZK in them at this point is crazy. You just see it like project that had nothing to do with it 3 months ago have now hired a ZK or person to at least do research into that direction. I think at the recent DevCon in Bogota, there was like, I'm kind of, this is very anecdotal, but like I think like half the talks had some ZK mention. And not to say that all of them were ZK talks or ZK projects, but do you think that it might, like, so one of the fears I have is it becomes like blockchain in 2017, like we're like failing startups would just like sprinkle some blockchain to like get some attention.
Yeah.
I hope that's not happening.
Enterprise grade blockchain ZK.
I mean, it probably is going to happen, but like all it takes is one company to come through it and be really successful for it all to be fine. But yeah, there's definitely going to be like a ZK backlash, and it's going to happen soon. And then we're going to get through that, and then we'll see what actually happens.
Cool. I want to talk about your new project, and then I do want to talk a little bit about the Tornado Cash stuff. But before I actually do either of those, like I think where we stopped in your story was Zcash was founded. You were part of the org, right? You were part of the foundation.
I was part of the electric coin company. The zero coin electric coin company was the original name of it, and part of it means that I was like on the Slack and doing some stuff and helping out. And then ultimately Zuko said, "Hey, would you join this new foundation that I'm starting?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds great." And then that was that.
Okay, and you were there until just recently.
I just left the foundation board. I've been there for many years, and it needs some new blood, I think, and also like I'm just slammed. So I think it's really good that more people are going to be able to be there.
How has the Zcash community been? Like the trajectory of it? Like it was the first, but now there are a lot of ZK projects. So yeah, I'm just curious, like how that developed.
So, one of the things I would praise the Zcash community for, and also what people criticize it for, is it's a very polite, science-focused community, right? Like we care a lot about doing ZK right, doing security right, doing this right, and not, shilling and worrying too much about the price. And that I've always loved. I think that's a great thing about the community, but obviously a lot of people would see all of those things as criticisms. They think that the whole point of a community is to, pump the price. Who cares about this technology? So that's always been kind of a split, and that's just the personality of the community. The upshot of all that is that things have come out of the Zcash community that have had huge, I think, disproportionate influence on everything else, right?
Sure.
So Tornado Cash is not exactly Zcash, but it's basically a fork of like the Zcash over Ethereum idea that some of the Zcash folks like did at a hackathon. Not a fork; it's just kind of a reimplementation. And like Tornado Nova is basically Zcash sapling, and now there's a whole bunch of new proof techniques based on Halo. And I've been talking to some ZK startups, and they're like, "Yeah, we're using Halo or Halo Plus." That also came out of like ECC and Zcash. So I think that there's been a huge influence on the world, even if the value of Zcash hasn't, pumped every possible dollar out of the world. And obviously people are very unhappy about that. I understand that too.
I remember even early on, the electric coin company offered up, time and resources to the Ethereum Foundation just to bootstrap their understanding of zero knowledge systems really early on. That I think also, that they really don't get enough, I think, credit and praise for doing that and being that open with the research they were working on.
There's a snark verifier. There's a precompile in Ethereum that verifies zero knowledge proofs, and that basically was just like, hey, we want to be able to validate Zcash transactions, and that's why Tornado Cash worked. That's why all of these different systems work because that was sort of lifted directly from Zcash.
And I guess like getting Vitalik interested, I don't know if it was Zcash itself, but definitely the scientists around Zcash got Vitalik interested quite early. And then he prepared that series of Intro to ZK Snarks, which was incredibly influential. Like I know this in my community because it's constantly cited. It's like one of the first things cited when people join. They always want to see those blog posts first. And that, obviously was incredibly influential in Ethereum. So like the community would have known about it from that point forward.
Yep, he was really enthusiastic. I mean, Vitalik he is an advisor to I think ECC, and he's been involved in this community from the start, and he's excited about it. And I think that that influence made a big deal. Also, the connection with Ellie being part of Zcash, and then also being part of Starkware, and Starkware being tightly tied to Ethereum and like all the Stark stuff, spawning other businesses. Like there is a direct lineage there. Like I don't know that we can say, hey, we take credit for it all. But there's a lineage. It's not just random stuff that happened.
So let's talk about Sealance. Am I saying that right?
Sealance.
Sealance, okay. So I guess I'm just curious. We kind of teased it. It's using zero-knowledge proofs, but it's compliance related. Tell us a little bit about what it is. What's the purpose of this project?
Yeah, so for years, I mean, I started back in like 2016. One of the things I've been super excited about privacy, and I'm kind of in the like cypherpunk side of privacy. Like my view is privacy should just be like privacy, and we should not, worry about governments. We should just do what we want and whatever. And I'm very unhappy with the way that computers have really taken away privacy and payments and all sorts of other areas. So I'm very much a cypherpunk person, but I also recognized, and I think we recognized this way back when in like 2013, that there is a threat that, we may end up with a world where we get either maximal privacy or we get like no privacy at all. Like every payment you make is recorded by the government. And, if we force people to choose, particularly if we force governments to choose between those two worlds, we may end up in the worst possible world. And so one of the things we thought about was, is there a compromise? Is there a way that we can have compliance-based systems where we get the privacy that you would get from cash transactions? Like small value transactions are totally private, but also if somebody money launders, $200 million like North Korea recently did, got Tornado Cash in trouble. Like there is something we can do about that. We can enforce some sort of compliance, or I'm not saying like hunt them down necessarily, although maybe from North Korea that would be good, but I'm saying like we could prevent those kind of events from taking place. And so we spent some time thinking about that, did some research. Ultimately, that research we decided, and we, as by the way, my partners, Iran Tromer and Shlamit Azgad Tromer, we founded this company and we said, let's take this commercial, let's build these systems and actually launch them. And so that became Sealance. And, like I've always been a little nervous. I'm afraid that somebody is going to accuse me of being a shill for like big regulation. And, maybe to some extent they're right. But I do believe that these systems are going to exist, and somebody should do them in a way that's compatible with privacy rather than having Chainalysis or somebody else, no offense to Chainalysis, build them all and make them look like something much, much worse. And so that's been the project I've been involved in for 2-3 years now.
And it sounds also like time spent in the industry and sort of learnings that have led you to want to build this particular product. It speaks to what we want to talk about next, which is the Tornado Cash sanctions in a way. Like the industry, the ZK industry, I see a lot of different teams that kind of, they run the gamut from being very, very compliance oriented to extremely anti-government, don't want anything to do with anything compliance. And Tornado, I believe, lived a little bit closer to that second pole. Do you still think that there is a place for those projects that are not compliance, given that you've made sort of a decision of where you want to sit and work on it? Do those projects still have a place, the ones that go really far out? Or will they just kind of create basically animosity from the governments that'll come down with a strong fist on them and potentially kind of wreck our industry?
Yeah. Okay. That's like 3 different really good questions.
That was a little bit of a train of thought there.
Yeah. No, but you're asking like the right question. So first of all, hey, we're not in mainstream adoption phase right now, right? Like there are only a few 100,000 people, actively using Ethereum right now. So this is like early days, right? When we get to, 100 million people actively using Ethereum every day, and we get to 1 billion people actively using Ethereum, that's the mainstream adoption case. The fact that Tornado Cash exists in, this relatively small space right now does not mean that, it's going to be the same when we're into the world where, Ethereum is like Facebook and we have that many people using it. So you can have systems like Tornado Cash exist. And at the same time, you can say, well, look, the mainstream systems, the ones that, everybody and their brother is using, those systems might not have as many Tornado Caches. So like these can be just two different worlds, the mainstream and the niche things where Tornado Cash will continue to exist. And I like that. And I hope that is the case. The second question you asked, the other question is, is Tornado Cash going to bring down the big hammer of government?
Well, not even Tornado Cash, but like things like Tornado Cash or things that maybe even push that ethos further away from the mainstream.
I'm very, very curious to hear this response for my own professional reasons.
I mean, I could go on a lot and say a lot of things here, but the answer is this thing that we're doing, and it's not just Tornado Cash, it's not just privacy. This thing that we're doing where we are building, financial systems or payment systems that are not centralized and tightly controlled by government regulators is a really inevitable thing. It's a thing that has been held back. And the thing I really wish I could convince people of, I say this thing and it's so obvious to everybody, and it sounds stupid when I say it, but it's true, which is that computers are really good at doing certain things. They're really good at, drawing graphics. They're really good at making music. And they're really good at browsing the web. These are natural things for computers to do. And one of the things that computers are really good at doing is sending, exchanging value back and forth, making payments. They're just naturally built for this task. And yet, when you look at the last, 22 years or so, there has just been this emptiness when you look for companies that make it actually easy to send real payments, like cash type payments. There's been nothing. Before Bitcoin, there were a few centralized companies. They got their doors kicked in by government regulators and by the FBI because there were a lot of regular people who did not want that kind of business to exist. And so we had PayPal, and we had maybe Venmo. This is not a natural world. Yeah, but it's not just there are a million different companies who've tried to do social media. There are a million different companies who've made games. There are 2 companies who have been successful, maybe 3 at doing peer-to-peer payments. That's not normal. That's an artificial situation. And the problem is that that artificial situation is not tenable. You can't keep that situation going for much longer. And when you try to stop those companies that, people from using computers to do things they're very good at, you end up with decentralized systems that work around those regulations, and you end up with Bitcoin, and you end up with, Ethereum and whatever. And so anyway, I'm going to stop talking a lot, but what I'm trying to say is these systems are hard to control and stop, and they will proliferate. And it's like trying to stop, I don't want to use a bad analogy here. It's like trying to stop people from buying drugs, right? You can put a lot of restrictions that make it hard, make it expensive, but you're never going to get it to zero. And so those systems can't go away. At the same time, we don't like drug dealers in our neighborhoods, and governments don't like drug dealers. There are a lot of people in jail. And I would say arguably our country's a lot worse off because of things like the drug war. And what do you do about it? I can't stop the Tornado Caches of the world from existing. I'm not sure I would want to. And they are going to exist, and the government is going to overreact, and everybody's going to suffer in a whole bunch of different ways. And I'm not sure whose fault it is, but it's just the situation we're going to wind up in.
And what you said there, though, that it's this inevitability, the things we've built, the internet, the computers that we use, and now maybe decentralized ledgers, there is sort of a way that they're developing, whether we kind of try to slow it down or control it or stomp some out, it will still happen. But I guess, do you think we philosophically need to be at a different place as a society or something? Is that what we're waiting for? Or do we have to wait for the nation states to just sort of crumble enough that it doesn't matter anymore?
I mean, I think by the time they crumble that much, we're going to be all in a much worse place. So I'm not sure I want to look forward to that world. But I do think that, it isn't natural, right? There's always been a world where it was easier to send money around. And we did that, right? There was always, not that long ago when we could just send cash to people and nobody cared about it, or we could not every transaction you made was tightly monitored and the financial regulation wasn't quite as strict. And so it's possible to live in a world with privacy and some financial privacy, and the world didn't end then and it won't end now. And it's not like these regulations are stopping, all the drug money laundering in the world from happening all the time. So I think that we could be in a much more private world. On the other hand, do I think we're going to live in a world where there is no government regulation trying to control the flow of funds? No, I don't think that world's going to happen in my lifetime.
Let's fully move on to the Tornado Cash topic. I know we've just been kind of like heading there. So it happened in August. I'm really curious to hear from you. Like, you've been in this space for a long time, in that very much in like the privacy focused part of the industry. What did it mean for you when you saw this? Were you kind of like, oh yeah, we knew that was coming? Or were you actually surprised with how it went down?
You could know that something's coming and also be surprised when it goes down,
Okay.
right? It's a little bit of both. It actually surprised me it took so long for this to happen, and it surprised me that we got away with being so lax around adding privacy to protocols for so many years, right? Our whole thesis in starting Zcash was this is the way, or at least doing the research was, actually, when we started Zero Cash, we thought that this Bitcoin we naively thought Bitcoin would add it to their protocol. Like that was back in the days when people thought Bitcoin would update their protocol more often. And, it was only later that this whole idea of altcoins was a thing. So anyway, the idea that all of these new systems like Ethereum and other things popped up with no built-in privacy was really shocking to me. And yet, like, the world didn't end, right? We said governments are going to take advantage of this and they're going to filter and censor transactions. And the fact that that didn't happen for a whole, 8 years from the launch of Ethereum was pretty impressive. Unfortunately, if you look right now at Ethereum's proof of stake block production, it is now, I think yesterday, up to somewhere between 62 and 64% of all blocks produced are sanctions compliant, meaning that they are filtering specifically for sanctions, type transactions. And that's a real, like, again, I'm not saying that Tornado Cash transactions are good or bad. I'm not trying to apply a value judgment here, but you can't have a censorship resistant protocol in that environment. And when you've gotten there, like, something terrible has happened and it's not good for you.
I mean, in a lot of ways, that just demonstrated the impact that a government can still have, whether it be for privacy technology or not, right? It could be just for anything. If there's a way that if there's addresses that they don't want to be included, now we can see that there is a way to get companies that have sort of quite a bit of power to comply.
Yeah.
And I think in the proof of stake case, we've done now 2 episodes where we talked about this, but it's like the MEV, it's like at a different place in the stack even where that compliance can actually happen. I think we always thought it would be like validators, miners, right? But now it's like, oh no, wait, there's like all these other actors kind of emerging who can also do it.
And so much of that is that those pieces are public and transparent to the world, right? It like makes me, this whole thing kind of makes me think like, was in the 8 years, that 8-year interregnum where we were sort of left alone was actually creating this complacency around the privacy piece, right? Where we all, like, it was almost, it almost works. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat on here, but it seems like, it kind of works to the government's favor that all of a sudden there are, maybe not millions or tens of millions or 100 million, but hundreds of thousands of very active people that are now reliant on a system that doesn't have privacy baked in.
When your adversary is screwing up, don't step in and remind them that they're making a mistake. And I think that's what the government, whether they were doing it consciously or it was just laziness, like that's what they were doing. And it's a very effective thing. Let people get locked into a system that is, at a deep fundamental level broken. And the scary thing about it, right, is Ethereum's strategy for adding privacy is something like Tornado Cash, right? They said, we'll have privacy. It's going to be inside of some smart contract. But, what OFAC sanctions exposed is that they can get you right there and they can filter those transactions. And if you don't bake it into the protocol and actively think about censorship resistance, then you're toast.
I think I asked this on the last episode I did with Martin, where we also talked about Tornado. Do you think in a weird way that it was kind of like good for the ZK community to have this happen when it did? And obviously, I just want to say something here. Like, anyone who worked on the Tornado Cash project, obviously it's not good in a good sense, but I just mean like for the health of the ZK industry, is it good that it happened?
Yes, I think it's really helpful. I think people, you can only say, hey, the bad thing's going to happen to you so many times and not have the bad thing happen. And, people stop taking you seriously. And so just seeing the bad thing happen exactly as predicted is really, really important. But this doesn't mean that people are going to pay attention, right? There are going to be people who maybe rightly say, well, Tornado did have a lot of crime and whatever on it. Maybe we don't care about that use case. Maybe it's just one, as long as OFAC and Treasury are just, doing these very isolated kinds of bans, it's okay. I think the danger there is that the same complacency, you can wish for things to be all right, but once people have figured out how to exploit a system, they're going to keep exploiting it more and more. And I think exploit, by the way, I work with people who talk to a lot of regulators, and I'm sure that this is going to make a lot of people mad. I just want to use the word exploit like a security researcher, like trying to make a system work the way you want. Doesn't imply a value judgment about what's happening, but it's definitely an exploit of the system.
Kind of going back to where, at least on this particular case, this moment, that 62% you mentioned, a lot of that, the fact that they can make like a multi-billion-dollar network OFAC compliant, even though it's decentralized, a lot of it comes down to MEV and the tools that are used to extract MEV. Have you paid attention to that space, the MEV space, and the cryptography because there are some like cryptographic solutions that have been proposed there?
Yeah, just a little bit. I'm aware of some. I know Penumbra is doing some of this stuff, and there are other
Yep.
people who are working on it too. It's a hard, ugly problem, but like it does come down to a combination of probably some cryptography and some encryption, maybe zero knowledge, and also just like honesty, right? If everybody in the system wants to censor, then no crypto in the world is going to save you. But as long as there's some percentage of people who aren't, what you can do is you can leverage cryptography to make it very expensive and very kind of difficult for people to censor. And I think that's the direction that we need to go.
I know one proposal was also this idea of just like, you can kind of like the MEV as it lives today with the agents that exist today, you can kind of use cryptography to break that up. But I know there is a counter argument to that says you can break it up, but they'll find MEV somewhere else. Like there can still be these centralizing points just like further away from validators or something.
I don't believe it. Like, I don't know. I'm on the fence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as an engineer, like when you see a problem like this, the instinct that I have is we have to be able to find a solution.
Okay.
We have to be able to not necessarily stop it, but make it so expensive to do MEV. And by the way, I see MEV and censorship resistance as two sides of the same coin, right? One is removing transactions, and one is changing the order of transactions. And they're both based on looking at the transactions and having thoughts about whether you want them. So they're just the same thing.
Yep.
And so if we solve the hard one, we solve the other one. Obviously, there's some slight subtleties in those solutions. But, to me, right, like this problem is we're really good at doing things using technology where we make things exponentially more expensive for people to run attacks. And I can't swear, but my intuition tells me there's something we can do where we do it like with 5 times as much resources that makes it, 2 to the 5 times as hard, or maybe some smaller exponential to run these attacks, or more costly. So we'll never stop it, but I think we can make it much more expensive. And I think we can do it in a way where the differential between the resources we have to throw at the problem and the expense of somebody overcoming it ends up being pretty asymmetric and pretty different. But I'm just spitballing. So, yeah.
Do you think that asymmetry will be enough with state level actors, though? Because that's like what I wonder about. If you have this world where Ethereum's like a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem, right? And then the value derived from censorship at that scale is so much higher. Like maybe the various governments would be willing to attack what is fundamentally like an asymmetric cost problem.
Yeah, and I think the much more likely outcome is what happens is that, maybe if Ethereum tries too hard to be decentralized, to be censorship resistant, then instead, like think of Ethereum like Usenet, right? Like they were a decentralized system, like for doing messages. And then Facebook, years later, Facebook is a totally centralized system, and Facebook, complies with all the regulations. So maybe the outcome is not so much like Ethereum fails or succeeds or gets attacked, but rather that Ethereum gets forked, or the version of Ethereum that is the future, or the version of whatever that is the future, is not just strips out those protections because, the value, the incentives that the government can offer to people who are willing to not transact that way is high, and that could be the answer. So I don't know what the policy feature is. I just think at the protocol level, we can individually defend protocols.
I do think that idea of at this stage, going in and changing Ethereum's model is going to be really challenging. There's a lot of vested interest in the system that exists today continuing, but there are a number of other networks that are out there and gaining some mind share even. I know like there was all this battle over the L1s, like the other L1s are going to like take over Ethereum. And I think that narrative definitely was knocked out for a while. And I don't think it will be like an L1 like Ethereum taking Ethereum. But yeah, right now it seems pretty entrenched in a weird way. Like the MEV, and I know there's a lot of conversation about this. There are other groups that are trying to come on. I actually believe that 62% you just shared might actually be down from what it was before.
Good.
So I know that there is an effort to sort of reduce it. I still wonder though, like there's so much vested interest. The MEV ecosystem is booming. Like apparently the other biggest talks at, in Bogota, I wasn't there, but the other most common theme in the talks was MEV. And so like it's exciting to people. People want to be in there. It's like there's brain share. It's really
pains me so much because it just sort of feels like
nihilistic,
an abstraction. Well, you know what it feels like to me? It's like when Chainalysis first started, and again, no offense to, maybe a little bit of offense to any blockchain analytics company. I don't care. But like, when they started, there was excitement around that. And to me, MEV is almost like, and again, I haven't spent much time or space looking into it very deeply, but so much of it seems like the same kind of negative externality that the blockchain analytics space like kind of engorged itself into early on in like Bitcoin's life. And I just sort of see like this is the Ethereum arc of that same kind of behavior.
Ooh,
there are wonderful people that like obviously like I think that the Flashbots team in particular like has very good intentions, and everything that I've heard about the way that they're approaching it is like, they have a deep sense of mission and purpose about why they're doing the things that they're doing. But it's still like on a conceptual level, it almost feels like this is, Ethereum's Chainalysis arc or something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I really, really don't know the future, but I do think that, if trusted systems can provide better value without MEV, like trusted centralized type systems, then decentralized systems where MEV is running rampant, it's going to be a bad thing for the decentralized systems. And maybe there's some economic reason why that'll happen, but I'd like to believe that, smart people will see the danger there and will steer away from it. And just to address what you just said about, the entrenched ecosystem, I agree, but like we've had entrenched ecosystems before, right? I don't want to say Bitcoin has gone away, but I think a lot of the energy in the world has shifted away from Bitcoin towards towards Ethereum, right?
Definitely.
Ethereum is the new hot thing, but that doesn't mean that we're done, right? There's always room for entrenched systems to become too entrenched and kind of lose relevance. So we'll see.
I think we've talked a little bit about some of the impacts of Tornado Cash, but as it happened, your surprise that week, I'm curious what your take was on the reaction of your peers. And like when it happened, people felt a lot. Twitter was a bit on fire. A lot of people had very quick hot takes. There was some misunderstanding, misinformation also going around. People made assumptions about certain things that weren't completely clear yet. Yeah, what was your take at that time, like on what people actually, how they reacted?
Well, okay. So the good news was that most people were sort of like, this is bad. I like the this is bad. There were different arguments for why this is bad. I didn't feel like there was, outrage, right? Like this was a very niche issue that like people who are really into ZK and privacy and blockchain cared a lot about. And the rest of the world was kind of like, meh, right? Some North Korean money launderer got shut down. And so that was one thing that I noticed. I'm not sure what it would take to kick this kind of stuff out into the world, but it was a little bit less of a massive issue. The other thing that I would say is, wow, I was surprised. So I got involved in one aspect of this, which was the code. I was very, very worried and sad that like GitHub took down Tornado Cash's code. And my view has always been really simple. Like you could argue whether Tornado Cash is good or bad. That's a great argument. Go have it. But the Tornado Cash code is just code. It's protected, in my opinion, by the First Amendment, and it's valuable. Like my students need it. I need it. Like that code should exist. And I thought, here's the uncontroversial part. So I'll just lop off the uncontroversial part, which is we'll just protect that code. And it got taken down by the sanctions, but we'll make a mirror of it, whatever. And I actually gotten like a certain amount of trouble.
Hmm.
With
Did you?
yeah, not so much trouble. I heard third hand that some people were unhappy with me about that, and I was a little bit shocked. I think it was just I was surprised. I thought
Wow.
everybody from Treasury on down would basically say, "Look, we didn't mean to like take down the code. Of course, like the sanctions on the chain, maybe we meant that." And I think it just I accidentally, without meaning to, made some people like embarrassed or look bad, and it was it was surprising to me. And I guess maybe I need to grow up a little and learn that. But so that was one of the reactions I heard that I was sad about. I'm not sure what else to say. Like, I think that people have a lot of thoughts about Tornado Cash, and on-chain privacy should be a right, and they're going to take a lawsuit and they're going to do it.
Hmm.
I'm a little pessimistic. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that I'm pessimistic that that's going to work out for everybody.
Mm. About the code, I mean, so I remember that tweet. I remember you saying that you were going to do that. Later, when the FAQs came out, they did actually kind of say that the code was okay to use in educational things. Do you think your tweets had something to do with that being included?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, wow.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overemphasizing it. But like, I think getting it out there was important, and I think that people have to do that. And like, the one thing I could do as a professor who has a Twitter account that some people follow
Hmm.
is I can like make a big stink about that. And I'm really happy that I have the a large enough Twitter microphone to make a stink about things like that I think are important, even if
Yeah,
I
us
can't
too.
fix all the other problems. Yeah.
I'm grateful for that, and frankly, like, I also think that whoever felt embarrassed about you posting the code should have felt embarrassed, because it's a free speech issue, right? And if
Yeah.
it's crazy to me that, like, again, I actually, like, there's a friend of mine who, brilliant, like, law minded person, lawyer type, who does think tank style stuff in DC, and he tried to walk through why he thinks a lot of these, a lot of, like, the lawsuit is a no-go, why there's like a sufficient amount of leeway in the way that, OFAC can actually, like, there's apparently an argument to be made that OFAC can in fact sanction. I intuitively feel like it's terrible, but apparently the way the law is written suggests otherwise. But I think even he would admit that, like, the code itself is still something that should be permissible to publish and post.
Yeah, I think these are the kind of values that like we should all just sort of say, like, nobody should disagree about this. It is definitely protected. The code is protected. It's valuable. And maybe it was just more a question of like the implementation. Nobody had the intention of taking down the code. The implementation just kind of went crazy,
Mm.
and people are a little embarrassed about that. Nobody is necessarily disagreeing with that, but yeah, like, we have to be more careful. And a lot of these sanctions laws, the laws that enable the sanctions, have specific riders that basically say, hey, there are these exceptions, and they're designed to protect things like bookshops and
Hmm.
publication, and they exist because we as a country value our First Amendment and our
Yeah.
ability to for people to speak. And software is no different, and that's a place where I think we need to draw a line.
Yep.
Did you learn a lot about how Treasury works when this happened? I did. I'm not American, but I learned a lot about all of the different administrative units. We also did a show about that, where the like Treasury and OFAC and the CFTC
Yep, yep.
and the SEC and like how they all relate or don't. But yeah, did you already know all this, or was it like, did it actually shed some light into how they work for you?
I didn't know as much about OFAC as I do now, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. Like, one of the things I'm very happy about is not being I'm not deeply attracted to being an expert on this. There are people who are great
Hmm.
at this. I work with some of them, like Peter Van Valkenburg, who I'm sure you've all met. He's great. He's at Coin Center. He knows all this stuff by heart, and he can talk to me for hours.
Yep.
But for me, I feel like if I know too much about that, it's going to curse me, and I'm going to like forget how to do like tech or something.
Well, it's going to make you worried about every single decision you're trying to make, because there's all
Yes.
the possibilities.
But I have had a bunch of meetings with regulators. I'm going to say this. I had a meeting with some folks at FinCEN. I've had meetings with folks at Treasury and their, kind of their digital, I guess, innovation departments. And all of these people are super nice, super intelligent, well informed about all of these areas. They're not like bad guys. I just
Mm.
really want to make it clear that like it's not just a bunch of people going around. And even when I talk to some of the folks who are in the national security side, and I've talked to some of them like in like the administration, they have strong feelings about this, and they really, really, really probably with good reason, do not like the idea that North Korea has 500 million or 600 million or maybe didn't get it all. And like for them, this is a matter of like, US cities not blowing up in mushroom clouds. And it's very hard for me to tell those people they're wrong. So they're not totally on the wrong side there.
My sense when this happened, on Twitter at least, there's almost this attitude that like OFAC is coming to take away your fun. Like they want to hurt you. Like that was sort of the feeling, at least, that people were reacting with, sort of like everything we're doing, they're against us. It took me doing that interview with a few lawyers who could help me navigate what was happening, that like there's like a mission, a goal, and this is one of the tools they're using to get that goal. But it's not necessarily to shut down the blockchain industry.
Yeah. If they wanted to shut down the blockchain industry, right? Like this was a scalpel. This was a scalpel and not a axe. They could have used an axe and that would have been stupid, but they used a scalpel.
Although not perfectly.
No, but like, no surgery ever goes perfectly. Yeah, like it could have been 100 times worse, easily.
Yeah.
What do you think comes out of this? I mean, we talked a little bit about what we hope, but going forward, what's the takeaway? What do you want to see on the horizon from the ZK community? I mean, you talked use cases. I mean, I think once you start to explore use cases, there's so many kinds of use cases, which will hopefully continue to be like, I guess I hope that it doesn't stop the ability for us to brainstorm all these great use cases, that we get stuck on this one use case that isn't executed correctly yet.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to see like zero knowledge get baked in at the lowest level of these systems, right? It has to be there. It has to be part of the system. And that's going to mean payment privacy, and it's going to mean payment privacy is going to have, some of these features that, again, not shilling my own thing, but like regulatory compliance is going to end up being more and more important to people, especially as privacy is out there. So that's a thing. I want all that to exist. I want that not just privacy technology, the zero knowledge technology to start to find new applications. And I think we're starting to see some of those. I really do believe like DeFi is not stupid, right? A lot of people look at DeFi and they're like, oh, this is a clown show. And I know the people I talk to in the academic community are like, DeFi is just a bunch of people like pumping and, doing all this. It's not. I think DeFi is going to be really, really, really important. And I think there's a really compelling argument to make that DeFi will actually be a lot more efficient than centralized financial systems, but I accept that I may be wrong about all that. And without privacy, without zero knowledge, none of that technology is going to ever be able to go into the real world use cases, because like you can't have MEV all over the place. You can't have everyone monitoring your transactions. It's ridiculous. And so for that stuff to grow up, these technologies have to become mature. But once you get outside the obvious stuff, there is the big question. Like there is this huge green field for how are we going to do more exciting applications? How are we going to make it so that like the Googles of the world can do that identity stuff and like, in a way that's private? How can we make it so that, we can handle all this data our phones are generating in a way that lets us do useful things, but is hopefully not abusive and is also private. And all of those things are going to need infrastructure to grow up on. And I think one of the big things we're not seeing very much of that stuff deployed, because every time somebody wants to deploy a technology like that, it requires a Google to talk to a MasterCard or something like that. And that makes this much harder. Once it becomes a platform that's available like AWS, which could be a few years away, then we're going to see applications we haven't even thought of that are going to do huge things with data. But I can't tell you exactly what they are any more than I could have told you exactly what was going to happen with the internet back, in the early days. Things surprised me.
Very cool. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your background, the work you did and the work you're doing today, and also talking to us about the Tornado Cash OFAC sanction, the impact, what this could mean for our industry. Yeah, we covered a lot. Thanks for coming on.
Gotcha. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great.
I want to say a big thank you to the podcast team, Tanya, Rachel, and Henrik, and to our listeners. Thanks for listening.